This is Joseph O'Brien, former senior engineer specialist at Boeing. He has worked on many rockets, planes, and satellites throughout his career. Joseph graduated with a degree in engineering at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville in 1981, but on his diploma, they spelt it as engineering. Born in New Jersey, worked at Boeing in Seattle, now found permanent residence here in Maine. As someone who has grown up with his love for science, he has found something more intriguing that has changed his life forever: his love for God and the message of the gospel. He studied all sorts of sciences with his degree in engineering and deep love and research for astronomy and geology with some quantum mechanics. He loves astronomy, engineering, and teaching kids robotics. And today, I'm going to ask him his opinions on his faith in God and science. To start off, Joseph, can you debunk the flat earth theory real quick?
Yeah, I think so. I worked on a program called the Inertial Upper Stage, and that was a launch system that went inside the space shuttle. The space shuttle went around the Earth once every 90 minutes, and every view that we had taken from the space shuttle back to the Earth was all circular in shape. And the only way that you can have that from every angle is for it to be a sphere. Otherwise, they'd see it as an ellipse. And we launched Galileo, Ulysses, Magellan, a whole bunch of tracking data and relay satellites. This is a tracking data and relay satellite as it's leaving the shuttle payload bay. And this thing with USA that looks like a trash can, it weighs 63,000 pounds. And so that gets released by a bunch of springs that push it away from the shuttle. And then 45 minutes later, the whole thing automatically ignites, and then it transfers on.
You've told me that you grew up being told that atheism is the truth, but what made you change your beliefs and why?
Well, it wasn't anything that happened overnight. It took me quite a while to really understand things, and the fundamental belief of atheism is that all things happen by chance. And if you look at what happens as things as simple that occur in nature, nature goes to disorder. And as I started doing more and more research, and in particularly some of the quantum mechanics stuff that I did, that things couldn't have been randomized and come together. There's a lot of things that you can point to. One of the simple things that I point to is the simplest bacteria that's out there that's considered alive. The very, very simplest has approximately 350 million molecules to it. And in order for these systems to be alive, there's nothing organic on the Earth at this point. I mean, you're looking at the very beginning of life. That first cell has to be able to make its own food. It has to protect itself. It has to reproduce. It has to be able to get rid of waste products. So it has to have some type of energy absorbing system that enables it to function, to stay alive. It has to have a full genetic makeup such that when it does divide, it can keep growing. And nature is just not it's not set up to do that. I actually flipped the whole debate between what does science use to show that there is a God, to one of which challenges atheism, to say, what does science do to prove atheism? And that probability to accept atheism is way out there. I mean, I have to believe in 1 in trillions upon trillions to believe that atheism was able to randomly create everything that exists right now, because nature is ordered, and there's no way that nature goes to order, it goes to disorder.
People have this belief that science and religion, especially Christianity, seems to clash heads, but you see it differently. A lot of Christians struggle with the age of the earth or evolution as they see it contradicts the scriptures. But you don't think so. Why is that?
Okay. If I'm thinking about how, if a kid comes up, a small child, let's say they're in first grade, and asks me how a car works, I would give them a very simple explanation of saying, I step on this pedal, it puts more gasoline in the car, gives the car more energy, it goes in this direction, and I get to steer and control it. If I have somebody come up that's in middle school or early high school and ask me how a car works, I may get into the details of the operation of a four-cylinder engine. If I get asked by somebody that's in college how a car works, I may get into the consumption of oxygen and its relationship to gasoline as it expands inside the piston and creates a pressure it gets to the point of auto detonation, and you wind up with knock in the car. You get into a lot more specifics about how the car works. So the Bible, in particularly starting off with Genesis, where a lot of the overall time history of the earth comes into play, there wasn't anybody around. And God created the earth in 6 days, right? And that whole process of seeing that in the Bible, nobody was around to record that. There wasn't anybody. So here's a bunch of people trying to create this book that says this is what God created and this is how they did it. They weren't there. So to come up with an explanation that gives you some interest into proceeding along with this story, it was a very simple thing to try to caveat it to a group of people at that particular time that lived in that historical time frame, that you wanted to engage them in the overall biblical story. Would it really make sense to get down into the quantum mechanics of how things came together and really started to evolve out and say that this was God's process when nobody really understood it at the time?
We're still trying to understand it today.
And we are absolutely still trying to understand it today. There's so much of science that we have no clue with. So you have to understand, who is the readership going to be? And, if I were to sit down and try to assign, given a book to somebody that I want you to create some rules for people 2,000 years from now that are going to use as a life guidance, it would be literally impossible to even take on that effort. To think of how are people 2,000 years from now going to be looking at this? What are they going to be thinking? Much less getting to the point of us saying, what did the people back then understand?
So you're saying because we try to westernize it too much in 2024 that we forget the cultural frame it was in back then. Because if God really described everything, how he made the earth, it'd be an endless book. We're still figuring it out today. So to dummy it down, he metaphoricalized it kind of, for people back then, for that culture?
Yeah, they were all parables that were being taught. Nobody understood the details of science as we do today. And so that explanation comes out more and more basic. I mean, it's like teaching a first grader how a car works. You just don't get into those kinds of details. But that's something I've always been interested. I really want to. That's something I've prayed for, is God, just tell me how everything works. Pretty simple.
People try to pin the argument that belief in God or a certain God is a scientific question, but in reality it's more of a philosophical question. What don't atheists understand when they try to argue against a being that cannot be proven by the scientific method?
Yeah, this is where I start turning the whole argument back onto the atheist. Prove to me that atheism is real, that things are really spread out, and everything came together to form this world that we currently live in. The earth has to be in the perfect place, away from the sun. If we're just a little bit closer, things fry. If we're a little bit further away, we have freezes that take place that are unimaginable. 3.5, if we really trust some of the science that comes out, 3.5 billion years ago, the moon struck the earth. Okay, so just prior to that, scientists believe that every wave that hit the shoreline was a major tsunami. The earth was wobbling out of control, and it took the moon to hit us just right. If it hit us 30 seconds earlier, then it would have caused enough damage into the earth that we would have basically split apart and none of us would exist. If it hit us 30 seconds later, it would have been too much of a glancing blow. And again, we would maybe be into a worse spin than we were beforehand. So here's this object that had to be traveling through space for billions of years because it had to be a solid object. And it's coming in and it's striking the earth in this very perfect place. And the odds of that happening are just astronomical. To have things line up like that. The simple thing that, if you take the geology route, there's roughly 4 or 5 times as much water interior of the earth than there is in all the oceans. And it's because of that water that enables plate tectonics to happen. And that plate tectonics gets rid of a lot of the carbons that are in our atmosphere and subducting it, right? So it's cleaning up our atmospheres, and we have a chance of life. So there's so many things that had to come together in order for us to be here. It's so exceptional.
Another one that's my favorite is Jupiter, because between us and Jupiter there's Mars and the asteroid belt. Jupiter's so big, the mass pulls really just pulls all the asteroids. People like to say that Jupiter kind of plays goalie for us for the asteroids with the gravitational pull. Just little things like that just shows that it's just really, like, you can understand why people throughout history has always thought of a higher power, because it's just too perfect.
Right, and you look at the moon, it's full of puck marks.
Yeah.
It's been hammered.
When you realized that there had to be a creator in this universe, you had to look at each religion who claims to have the right God or the right ideology. How did you end up at Christianity?
Okay, so as I started getting into all this science stuff and started realizing that there wasn't a way for it to be created by itself, then you had to start looking at, well, how is it created? How did God do it? And what are the guidelines for that? And it surprised me following the life of Jesus, because getting in and reading some of the Bible, and I'm by no means an expert with the Bible by any person's account, but as I started trying to understand his life, then what I came to the conclusion of was that here is somebody that already knows what's going to happen, knows where to be, knows what to say. So here's somebody too that doesn't write anything down. He's never written anything, and yet people are following him and recording what's happening in his life. I'm not going to have that happen to me. Mm-hmm. This isn't just an average person that's out there with being written about superficially, that they're bringing a lot of extraordinary circumstances to what he's doing and exaggerating the things that he's doing, because it's written by several different people of the things that he did, just from their own perspective. Mm-hmm. And so, I started following that a lot deeper, and it really got to me when he started praying about knowing that he was going to be crucified, and saying, God, is there something else, some other way that we can do this? And it fascinated me to go back and compare. And I haven't really heard any pastor talk about this before, but early on in the Old Testament, I always talked about having lambs for sacrifice, right? And putting them up on the altar, giving them sacrifice to the Lord, and so forth. So it was kind of like the Lord telling us, all right, I'm going to make this sacrifice for you. Now clean up your life. Let's not go through this process of sin again. Make it clean so that we don't have to do this anymore, right? Mm. And man couldn't, right? So it finally, I look at it as God got upset with us and said, okay, you're not getting this, so I'm going to send down what I'm going to call my son, which is actually me, and I'm going to straighten this out for you so that all your sins can be wiped clean and finally make a path for you to heaven, because you're just not getting it.
Next question, recording right now. What do atheists not get about the Bible when you look at it from a scientific lens?
Okay, so this really starts to flip that statement that atheists are trying to use science to prove God, right?
Or disprove God.
To disprove God, right? Well, yeah.
Either or.
Yeah, either or, right? Yeah, because if you could use science to prove God, then atheism would go away, right? Mm-hmm. So I look at the basis of where science has really taken us. And although we may consider ourselves extremely advanced compared to all other portions of history, science is incredibly lacking. We don't know a lot of things, right? So, real simple little set of calculations that I did was I wanted to figure out how much energy was actually available in a simple grain of sand, right? So everybody knows, like poles repel, unlike poles, north and south attract, right? So we have this scientific view of, and I think it's accurate, of an atom that has protons in the center, there's some neutrons, and the electrons are flying around the outside. Well, if like poles repel, we've got protons right next to each other inside an atom. So I looked at silicon oxide, which is the chemical makeup of sand, and looked at the arrangements of the protons and thought, okay, from a single molecule of sand, what's the force that is trying to repel the protons apart? And after running through Coulomb's equations and coming up with the answer, I was really surprised. For one particular molecule, it came out to be 53 pounds force. Right? So if I expand that over a sand grain, that the amount of energy there comes to 1,000,000 times trillion pounds force that could potentially be released from a single sand grain if all the protons next to each other just flew apart. That is an unbelievable source of really high energy coming from a single sand grain. So then we've got to say, all right, from the scientific point of view, although we have no understanding whatsoever of this force that's holding things together, what does it really come to? And we have to create this thing called the strong nuclear force that is extremely strong for holding protons together, but it has no distance to it whatsoever. It's something that is totally made up based upon trying to hold these calculations together that we don't understand at all. So I look at science, and the more I get into it, the more lacking that it really is of describing anything.
Really? So do you think a lot of people who try to kind of flex with science a little bit, saying it has all the answers, or soon enough it'll have all the answers, you think so? Like, do you think they try to buff up that they know more than they do, or do you think
any scientist that says they have the answers is not a scientist in my mind? We are so crude yet compared to what is out there that we don't understand. I've always, if we take a look at almost any physical constraint that's happening, what we do in our world is we actually go out and we observe something, and then we try to describe it, run calculations on it, and show why this thing exists, right? And say why it's there and how it's acting and so forth. And that's where all science has really taken us. That there's only been one example where Einstein ran all these equations out, and he came up with things that we should see in space that we didn't see yet because of the way that gravity bends light, that we should be able to find somewhere a really bright galaxy that's behind a black hole, and it should be able to show what's called Einstein's ring and Einstein's cross. And I don't believe those were found until after Einstein died, or very close to his death. So he projected, by his calculations, that we should see this, and we didn't see it yet, but we found it later. And to me, that is just, the place where knowledge should really be taking us. That is the ultimate place to go to. I also look at things like what it takes to be really a genius. Mm-hmm. And to be really a genius is to make things as simple as possible.
Yeah.
So the point where anybody could understand it. That's the true measure of being a genius and being able to describe something from the quantum mechanics side of the house and say, this is why this is happening, and be able to explain it to a fifth grader, so that they would get engaged and actually understand and have that desire to learn more about the physical environment that we're in. But there's so much science that we have no clue. We observe something and then we try to understand it, and we're so far from things. I looked up the other day the size of the number of atoms in a typical human cell is 100 trillion atoms in a single human cell, right? And how many human cells do we have in the body? It's approximately the same number. It's somewhere around 100 trillion of these cells in the human body. Oh my gosh, are you telling me that, in each one of these cells have different functions to them? I mean, some of them can perceive light, some of them, create boundaries, and some of them pass fluids, some of them, there's all these different functions that the human cells do, and it's really quite a structure that, you start coming down to an aspect of, do I believe in evolution? And yeah, I believe that God is evolving us as we go along.
Yeah, and 2 points. One, to go on the evolution part, there's the whole thing about micro or macro evolution, but I think that God gave us the genetics and whatnot to be able to adapt and to certain environments and whatnot, where someone from a different country will move to America. They have to adapt psychologically to their new environment. I think over time it would make sense for our body or a species to adapt to the new environment it's in over time. And there's also mutations, all of that. And then when you're talking about trillions of atoms and trillions of cells, and then he said some emits light, some do other things, but the fact that they all work in harmony, like an orchestra, perfectly, is just so hard to believe, to think that just happened by chance.
Yeah, we've had a lot of evolution in our life, in our overall history. The one that I like the most is that there's this clam in the Great Lakes, right? And this clam obviously has no light sensing with it whatsoever. What this clam does is it puts out a little lure, and a fish will come along and grab onto this clam, this so-called lure coming from this clam. And as the fish bites into this, the clam releases all of its little babies, all of these little clams, into the fish. And the clam attaches onto the gills of this fish. And eventually, as these clams start to grow and develop, they start taking the oxygen away from the fish dies, and the clams feed off of the remains of the fish, and these clams, develop the next little lure. What's incredible about this little lure is it has the exact same color and shape as a fish, as one of these little minnows that swim around in the Great Lakes. It's got a yellow color to it, and it can make it move just like the fish. Now, obviously, the clam can't see, but through evolution, if a clam didn't have a very good lure to show the other fish, then it wasn't chosen by the fish to go on and reproduce. So this clam evolved into creating this perfect lure. And that to me is just so unbelievable that, systems can evolve like that.
My last question to you, Joseph. You're an agnostic atheist at Boeing who studied rocket science and astronomy and beliefs on the side, who now knows and has a relationship with Christ. How did Jesus change your life, and what words of encouragement would you like to give to someone who is seeking the truth like every scientist out there?
Well, I've always looked at my own religious beliefs as being very personal, and my beliefs, I've never addressed it from the sense that I want to impose those on anyone else. What anybody believes, what anybody else believes is fine with me. My move towards Christianity, my beliefs towards Christianity evolved so slowly that there wasn't a particular time frame when it magically changed my life. But after a while, it just became so difficult trying to not believe that, it was a much simpler path to that, obviously. And with that, it gave me a huge amount of peace, because now I know that there is life afterwards, and life, may not be as we know it here, but a spiritual continuance. And it's very, very comforting that if you're an atheist, you come up to the end of your life, there is nothing. Your legacy, one of my friends told me one time when I was leaving Boeing, it's kind of like having a huge swimming pool and you're pulling your hand out of the pool and it's creating a ripple that goes across the water. It may last one path through the side of the pool to the next, and may come back, and then it's gone. Your legacy of everything you put together is basically gone. So if you're an atheist, unless you're somebody that becomes known around the entire world as one of the great leaders, I can't name anybody that's come in second in the Olympics who's never taken a gold medal. Here is the number 2 person in the entire world with regards to speed or accuracy or whatever their sport involves them to do. They're second in the entire world, and nobody can name them. What an accomplishment to have sitting on your shelf. But it may last, one generation to say, oh, my dad did this. Oh, I had a grandfather that did that, and otherwise your legacy is gone. So as atheists, I feel very sorry for them. I feel very sad that there's nothing for them at their end of their life. But yet all they have to do is believe in Jesus Christ, and their soul lives on.
And it's amazing too, as you're talking about legacies, and they usually die in a generation or not. Jesus' legacy is still relevant today as the most popular human in history, as it was when his ministry took place 2,000 years ago. When we say his name and swears, that guy is very popular. And I just want to end it on this quote. It reminded me of, it's by Werner Heisenberg. The first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you.
Oh, that's awesome.